This is the island of Corfu, and quite selfishly I regard it as my kingdom, although I'm not Greek. You see, I was brought here at the tender age of 9. This, in fact, was my bedroom. And it was here that I first learned there was colour in the world, that one had a sense of smell, a sense of touch. And so, although I was 9 years old, you could almost say that I was born in Corfu. Now, I was passionately interested in animal life of all shapes and sizes, and so I was lucky enough to come under the wing of Dr. Theodore Stephanides. He's that strange bearded gentleman you see pottering about over there. There's really no other way of describing Theodore except as a sort of walking encyclopedia. His real love, his first love, are all the microscopic creatures that live in ponds and ditches. But ask him a question about practically any subject under the sun and he seems to know the answer. Theodore could have been a very great man in public if he'd wanted to be, but he's content to be an even greater man in private.
Theodore, if we're going to pick that awful brat up from the airport, we ought to be going.
This boy that we're going to meet is actually my godson. And he's the son of a Greek diplomat in London. And I was wise enough to become his godparent, and his father sort of wished him on us for the summer. Theodore and I were looking forward to a nice, quiet, biological summer, pottering about our old haunts. I don't even know what the boy looks like. I haven't seen him since he was christened. But still, what can you do? You can't refuse to have your own godson out for a holiday. I think to give him a sort of overall picture there, I mean, from the coastal region point of view, we ought to take him up north. And there's some interesting stuff down by Perima.
And some of the dikes along the Helicopoulos Lagoon.
And then all this coast has got some very good reefs and things on it. And then right up in the far north, we could take it to Antonioti, I think. Don't you think so? With all the lilies and things, that'd be rather nice.
Well, we certainly mustn't omit this little drainage ditch. It's the only place that I found Hydra epipectus in the whole island.
I like to think of Corfu as the garden of the gods, the ancient gods of Greece. You know, it was quite near here that the death was announced of the great god Pan. I like to feel that he might even have died in Corfu, which would have been a jolly appropriate place for him to die. Yeah, when I was a boy here, I used to spend a lot of time catching terrapins. The one I was always after was the biggest one I'd ever seen. I called him Old Plop. I called him that because he used to plop off into the water every time I tried to catch him. And for months I tried to catch him without success. And then one day I succeeded with the help of my friend, the convict who'd murdered his wife. Theodore's lived in Corfu since he was 13. When I was a boy out here, he was practicing medicine and working at the X-ray clinic. But in addition to this, of course, he's a botanist, an astronomer, a biologist, a historian.
These little pools, I'm afraid, will all dry up this summer. The pond tortoises won't be harmed because they'll more or less estivate, that is to say, they'll burrow into damp places and remain more or less quiet during the summer months.
Ponticonisi means Mouse Island. There used to be lots of clams in the water around here. I used to dive for them when I was a boy. I used to swim out here to Ponticonisi nearly every morning with my sister. In those days, it was inhabited by a very ancient and very decrepit monk. And my sister used to go down and lie on the rocks and sunbathe. The old monk used to get in an absolute frenzy of rage, and he used to come down and shake his fist at her and call her a white witch. I think this was principally because she wore very scanty bathing costumes.
Come on, slow coach. Now, you spot the clams that we drive on.
When we first came to Corfu, this was one of the major forms of transport, the carroccino. In fact, we came up the very first day from the docks in a couple of these. We had my dog with us, and he spotted another dog standing in an alleyway and immediately started barking and trying to leap out of the carroccino to fight it. We had to hold him down, and then the dog in the alleyway started chasing us and barking all around the carroccino, and he was soon joined by about 25 others. So we really resembled a circus as we swept through the town surrounded by 25 barking dogs. This esplanade was laid out originally by a Frenchman on the lines of the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. If you sit on this esplanade long enough, you meet everybody in Corfu sooner or later. The really interesting part of the town is the old quarter, the old narrow streets and the tall Venetian houses with their faded shutters. I think it's a very beautiful part of Corfu. You know, one of the really nice things about these back streets is that wherever you go, you can hear bird songs. That's because everybody is mad on keeping birds. Bullfinches, goldfinches, linnets, canaries especially. Now, this is something I never succeeded in finding when I was a boy, because it's hidden away in this maze of little alleyways. It's the old Venetian well, Cremasti. 1699, the inscription reads, the work of Antoni Cocchini, for the public good. Now, there's one thing you must do, a thing that everybody, the moment they arrive in Corfu, should do. You must come and pay your respects to the saint.
Yeah. Posso in alto il micro, se fatelo? Considera che tutti? Dove?
Well, we better have two of the big ones, haven't we?
I think. Do the job properly.
Now, Saint Spiridion is the most important person on the island. In fact, the island really belongs to him. Most of the male children are called Spiro in his honor. And really, the islanders consider the saint to be more important than God. You see, everybody comes to pay their respects to Saint Spiridion. People on their way to work or on their way back from work, fishermen who've had a successful night, old peasant ladies in for a market day. Everybody just drops in and lights a candle to him because they revere him so much and he's performed so many miracles for them. So to ensure that you have a really happy holiday, we light our candles to him. You can't actually see the saint now because his embalmed body is lying in this magnificent silver coffin. You see up here all the votive offerings, the thank you tokens for the miracles that he's performed. I should think the ones with ships on are probably from sailors that he's saved from shipwreck. You will be able to catch a glimpse of him when they take him out of his coffin and carry him round the town in grand procession on August the 11th. The August the 11th procession is to commemorate one of Saint Spiridion's most famous miracles, which was when the Turks were besieging Corfu. He was seen to come down out of the sky with a host of angels and besiege the Turkish camp. And just at that moment, a tempest blew up and completely wrecked their camp. And so the Corfiots then managed to counterattack and drive the Turks off. And this is one of Saint Spiridion's most famous miracles. All these people are sick or suffering in some way or another, and they're waiting here in a line on the ground until the procession returns to the church. In the old days, the saint's casket used to be actually carried over the top of them, but now they carry it to one side. And in this way, these people hope that the saint will answer their prayers and be cured. We always used to treat this as a sort of holiday, and we'd come in from the villas in the country where we lived, and I'd make myself sick on ice cream, and we'd have a marvelous day in the town with everybody else in Corfu. Now, when I was a boy, I used to be able to actually see the saint's face. But I think perhaps he's not weathering very well now, because I see they've covered it up with a veil. The origination of the Corfu bands is very interesting. When the British occupied the island, and they had a garrison, of course, in the fort, and they had a band, and so out of politesse, every time they had the saint's procession, the British used to allow the band to march in the procession and play tunes and so on. Then they got a new governor of Corfu, who was rather a stickler for protocol, and he informed dear old Queen Victoria that this was taking place, and he didn't think it was a very good thing because it wasn't the same religion as Great Britain. And so they forbade the band to play in the procession, whereupon the Corfuites got so indignant that they clubbed together and bought their own instruments and formed their own band.
Saint Spiridion was born in the island of Cyprus, around about 270 AD. He died at the age of about 80. According to one tradition, a scent of attar of roses was smelt in the vicinity of his grave, and this attracted the attention of the inhabitants of Trimithus, who dug up his body and found that it was still in perfect state of preservation. For this reason, he was considered to be a saint until Cyprus was taken by the Saracens. After the fall of Constantinople, the body was taken through the Turkish lines, hidden in a sack of straw. After 3 years wandering, St. Spiridion was brought to Corfu in 1456.
Ανώσεως βαρβάρων, πυρίδωνα κερκύρας, μέγιστον ακτιμάς.
When we lived here before the war, most of the peasants measured distance by cigarettes. So if you stopped and asked a man, how far is it, he would say, to Gasturi? Tell me, Sihimu. And he would say, well, it's about 4 cigarettes, which was fine if you were a smoker, but if you were a non-smoker, it confused the whole issue.
One curious thing about the harvester ants is that they still have soldiers with enormous jaws, but these have lost all desire to fight. The soldiers are useful all the same to the ants because they're used as nutcrackers. Large seeds are given to these soldiers who crack them with their much larger jaws. Here in Corfu, the peasants hold the praying mantis rather in awe, and they call it the St. George's horse. It's believed to bring good or bad luck according to whatever happens to you after you've seen it. This is the caterpillar of the oleander hawk moth. These caterpillars have a curious habit of lifting the front ends of their body, which gives them rather the look of the Egyptian Sphinx. And for that reason, they're sometimes known as Sphinx moth caterpillars. Now, I want to show you one of these little cyclopses. The one you see there, it's a female. You can tell that by the two large egg bags which you see on each side. It belongs to the Crustacea, the same big family that the crabs and shrimps belong to. It's called a cyclops because if you see, it got in the middle of its forehead what looks like one large eye.
One of the marvellous things about Corfu is the quantity of water there is. In fact, the people are sort of connoisseurs of water because you'll see old men in villages sipping a glass of water, savouring it, and saying, yes, now this must come from so-and-so village. It's not as good as the water that they get in so-and-so village.
I've seen hornets and wasps drink from grapes in the same manner. They'll pierce a little hole with their tongues and suck up the juice of the grape. Sometimes towards the end of the season, if the grapes are becoming a bit fermented, you see the wasps and the hornets become quite drunk and rolling on the ground without being able to fly.
I bet I can throw this flat stone further than you.
Betting, betting, betting. You're always betting. All right, let's see. Not very good.
This is the casino, otherwise known as the Helion, which was built by the Empress Elizabeth of Austria as her summer residence. And now they gamble here. I suppose, as your godfather, I ought to consider your education a little bit. And so I'd like to point out to you that this is quite the most atrocious piece of bad taste in possibly the whole of Europe. In fact, the Helion has almost achieved success, because bad taste goes to a certain pinnacle where it almost becomes good taste. I remember even before the war, this was a place which all tourists had to visit. It was one of the sights of Corfu. And we used to, because the roads weren't macadam in those days, we used to be able to track the tourists through the olive groves by the clouds of dust that were raised by their cars as they passed. And we'd see them filing solemnly in to look at all this ghastly statuary and equally ghastly architecture. It always astonishes me, this business of gambling, that the people who take part in it don't appear to get any sort of pleasure out of it. They occasionally sort of laugh in a rather forced sort of manner, but they're too earnest, they're too tensed up about the whole thing. If you ever watched a lizard over a line of ants, he will go flip, and he's got an ant, and then he stares with intense concentration at the line of ants while he's swallowing the one he's got. And then he goes flip again. He gets no sort of gourmet pleasure out of the exercise, it seems. And it's exactly the same with these wall-eyed people sitting around a table watching that little ball go round and round and round and round. This dancing troupe is put on especially for the tourists. I mean, in my day, when I was young, I used to go to the paniris and the different villages, and 90% of the people, I would say, were in costumes like this. And they were like a sort of flock of butterflies. They were so beautiful. One of my favorite hunting grounds was the area that I used to know as the fields, which were really old Venetian salt pans. They were like a sort of gigantic chessboard spread out.
It's called the chaste tree because even from ancient times, an infusion of the seeds was supposed to promote chastity. And it was even known in the Middle Ages in England as monk's pepper. The Crusaders, before going off to the Crusades, generally arranged that their wives should be given their little daily dose. History doesn't say if they themselves took a daily dose in Palestine or wherever they were. little creature here is a Daphnia pulex. It belongs to the Crustacea, and I want you to see how beautifully transparent it is so that you can see all the internal organs. And this particular specimen is a female. It's so transparent that you can see the heart beating just below the curve of the intestine. You see some rather confused movements. Those are the legs which have been transformed into gills. It's a curiosity of nature in that it breathes with its legs.
Rose beetles. When I was a boy, there used to be a man who sold rose beetles on the end of a length of cotton to small boys in the villages, and they used to whirl the unfortunate rose beetle round and round and round until eventually he unfurled his wings and started buzzing on the end of this piece of cotton. And this was the village boy's idea of an aeroplane.
Well, Jerry, I think I've got a surprise for you here. Do you remember having seen this sort of creature before?
Yes. I do indeed, a giant water bug. And when was it here that we found these originally?
Yes, it's Belostoma niloticum.
Yeah.
And I even looked it up from my original notes. Your brother Lawrence Durrell found one of these at Calami in October 1936.
Yes, he was the first one to find them.
And you found two of them at Condorcali in December 1937. This one was found in the north of Corfu. This is the larval case of a cicada. The cicadas spend as much as 3 or 4 years of their larval life underground. Then they climb up the nearest bush or tree trunk and there transform themselves into the perfect insect. They have a sort of drum-shaped organ on each side of the abdomen, which vibrates and produces that sort of singing sound. An agama lizard.
I first discovered them on just one lump, a great big lump of gypsum near one of the villas that we lived in. But I see now that I've come back that, to my delight, they have spread, and now you find them all over the olive groves. I think this is wonderful. You know, I'm very annoyed that you're not going to be able to see the olive harvest. They're still, as you can see, tiny baby olives as yet. But it's probably the most important thing that Corfu produces. 3.5 million of them were planted during Venetian times.
A great number, because the Venetians paid a bounty for every olive tree planted, because they had Corfu as their source of olive oil.
Today, we're going to go to the island of Lazaretto. lazaretto means quarantine. This is because this small island was used at one time if ships came in and they had plague or cholera on board or something like that. The victims would be taken to lazaretto and put into a hospital there so that they didn't infect the rest of Corfu. In my day, I used to row out in my boat, the Bootle Bum Trinket, which was built for me by my brother, and collect some of my best specimens round the shallow reefs around the outer edge of the island. And in those days, it was absolutely alive with lizards. And yet now, all the lizards, for some obscure reason, have disappeared, and their place has been taken by tortoises. And now you see more tortoises per square inch than I've ever seen anywhere else in the world. And I can't explain this. It's very puzzling. In my day, the shores of Lazaretto were absolutely clean. But now, look at it, and most of the beaches of Corfu are exactly the same. Lumps of tar, the ghastly plastic bottle, ice cream cartons, old shoes, all the debris left by the tourist trade. As this is our last day, I thought we'd come right up here to the north to Antiniotti. Antiniotti, it's a lovely name. It's a ringing sort of name. We used to come up here periodically for picnics, and it was always a great excitement because you never knew if you get through by road, if you came by car because of landslides, and if you came by sea, a scirocco might come up and strand you there. But the whole white beach used to be covered with lilies, sand lilies, as white as ivory, and the scent from them was so gorgeous, almost overpowering. And we'd catch fish in the brackish lake behind the beach and roast them on great ruby-red beds of coal on the beach and eat them and bathe them in the limpid, warm water. I think really of all the beaches in Corfu, it is probably my favorite. In the old days, I remember the panegyri used to be spudeo. Yeah. It used to be marvelous because half of them would be there in costume. And they were absolutely gorgeous.
The dance is an old dance, but I don't think it's a Corfu dance. I may be mistaken. I think it's really one of the dances which have come over from Asia Minor after the Asia Minor War, when a lot of the population, you see, was expelled. They brought a lot of their customs to Greece, especially from the Pontus, the Black Sea area, because they brought, you know, the bouzouki music to Greece.
Come on, mate. We've only got 20 minutes to make the plane.
Well, there's something I want to do, Jerry. Could I go out for 5 minutes?
Only for a minute then, but not very long because we haven't got much time.
Gerald Durrell,